Welcome to another episode of Sports Takes with Nate Skates. I'm Nate, and on today's show, we are going to talk a little recap of the first two rounds of the NCAA tournament, talk about the Dogs' extremely disappointing performance, check in on our brackets, see how that's going, including our Mascot cage fight bracket, which, spoiler alert, isn't looking like a great way to make your tournament bracket. But before we get into really anything else, we've got to talk about Georgia. If you are a Dogs fan, it really couldn't get any more disappointing. I'm making this video a few days after the tournament game. I didn't want to just get out there and put a visceral reaction out after the game, but I have been thinking about it a lot off and on over the last few days. I've watched a lot of Georgia sports in my life. I've seen a lot of good. I've seen a lot of bad. Seen a lot of disappointment. And across all sports that I have watched, that was probably my most disappointed in the way that the players played. Of any sport. There have been more disappointing losses. There have been losses that were more emotionally devastating. There have been things that I was more angry about because of what it was, losing to Alabama in overtime in the national championship game. That obviously is a worse loss than what happened against St. Louis on Thursday night. But what I'm talking about is that is probably the most disappointed I have been in the way our players showed up. And I don't know what was going on in their heads. I don't know what was going on in their lives. I'm not trying to talk about these guys as human beings or anything like that, but we all saw it. Coach Mike White saw it. The players talked about it. It was what it was. And that performance was completely unacceptable, which Mike White has expressed, the players have expressed, but I'm going to talk about it. When I did the preview of the game, I made it clear I was not going to be even slightly surprised if St. Louis won the game. I felt like it was close to a toss-up, but I thought the athleticism of Georgia, the stronger schedule Georgia had played, that Georgia was probably going to squeak out a win here. But St. Louis, the efficiency, the shooting percentage, the field goal defense obviously made them a team that could win the game. This was not, a shocker in that St. Louis won. The shocker was in the fact that this was a 40-point game at one point. 40. Not a 20-point game, a 40-point game. And St. Louis is not 40 points better than Georgia, if they're better than Georgia at all. They're certainly not 40 points better than Georgia. There's hardly a team in college basketball that you're going to play in a season that you're 40 points better than unless you're a top seed, one of the upper echelon teams in college basketball. And no offense to St. Louis, as we saw their performance against Michigan in the second round, they are not one of the top echelon teams in all of college basketball. And we see Georgia played multiple of the teams that are in the Sweet 16 right now. They beat Arkansas. They beat Alabama. They beat Texas. Those are all Sweet 16 teams. Georgia beat them. They nearly and should have beaten Tennessee. That would have been 4 teams in the Sweet 16 that Georgia would have beaten. So I believe Georgia played 5 Sweet 16 teams. They, I think, were 3-2, could have easily been 4-1 in those games. So Georgia really should have performed better against St. Louis. And it just started from the opening tip. There's nothing positive to say about the game. Nothing. The shooting was atrocious. And this was a lot of the things that I had talked about throughout the season, particularly early in the season and the midway point, were the things that cropped back up. when I talked about Georgia's hot streak, where they had won several games, beat Texas, beat Kentucky, beat Alabama, I made a video and talked about Georgia decided to play defense. And I said at the time, I used that phrasing intentionally because when Georgia chooses to play defense, they are a very good team. When they choose not to play defense, they are not a good team, not at all. And that was the situation against St. Louis. What I saw and what we all saw was Georgia would run down, and we talked about this repeatedly on the show earlier in the year. Georgia was in a half-court offense, throwing up an ill-advised three, and then failing to get back on defense. And we've said all year, Georgia is not a good three-point shooting team. They shoot a lot of threes. When they are doing well, they are hitting those threes. They are not a good three-point shooting team. They have not been all season long. Yet they insist, whether they're cold as ice or not, shooting three after three after three. We saw early in the game St. Louis was cold from three. They're a much better three-point shooting team than Georgia was. We talked about that on the preview. However, what did St. Louis do? They started going to the paint. When their shot wasn't there, they went to the paint. What did Georgia do? Continually, over and over and over, go down, throw up a three. And miss it. Not just miss it. These shots weren't getting anywhere near going in. And yet, that's all Georgia wanted to do. So I want to mention a couple stats here to really illustrate how bad this was. I said that Cannon Catchings is Georgia's best pure shooter. And that when Georgia's really playing well, Cannon Catchings is shooting well, and that I thought he was a key to the game. Well, he was a key to the game. And I'm not trying to blast the kid. He's a great player, but Cannon Catchings was 0 for 11 on the game. That's not going to work. You can't go 0 for 11, 0 for 5 on three-pointers. No one shot well. No one shot well. Santos Surreal, who was basically non-existent in the game, played 12 minutes of the game, was 0 for 1 on field goals. Blue Cane was 2 for 7 and 0 for 4 on three-pointers. Even Marcus Millender was 5 for 15. 2 of 8 on three-pointers. The only person in the entire game who played well was Jeremiah Wilkinson, and he shot 7 of 15 from three-point range. You saw at halftime, Wilkinson said, "We're not playing hard. We aren't trying. We don't want to be here. We're going to have to get this turned around." He had 16 at halftime. He ended the game with 30. Jeremiah Wilkinson was the only one who acted like he wanted to be there. And I understand Jordan Ross was sick. There were some guys who were trying. They just, I guess, weren't performing well. But by and large, there was no effort. And what I mean by that is they weren't moving the ball. They're just playing one-on-one offense. And then when they missed the shot, as they did virtually every time they went down the floor, they weren't getting back. And I saw guys, it was like they hadn't played defense before, that they weren't even attempting to guard guys, to stop guys from St. Louis from getting in the paint, just getting turned around, looking up at the sky, having no idea where the basketball is going, having no idea where their man is. Just, it wasn't complicated. St. Louis just ran down the court about every possession and made one or two simple passes and hit a layup. I mean, that was the game. St. Louis, who's, as I said, is one of the best three-point shooting teams in the country, they didn't need to shoot threes. And they didn't have to just keep going down there and trying even when they were cold. St. Louis, who should have been a smaller, less athletic team than Georgia, pounded the Dogs to the tune of 66 points in the paint. That is whipping your opponent. 66 points in the paint. They also out-rebounded Georgia, which was the problem all season long. 47-36 on the rebounding. It's absolutely inexcusable for Georgia to get out-rebounded that bad by a mid-major team. It's inexcusable. St. Louis had 27 assists to Georgia's 9 assists. That was something I had talked about, that St. Louis was 10th in the country, I believe, in assists. Georgia's not been a good team in assists all season. St. Louis had more blocks than Georgia. Georgia has far and away been the leader all season long, start to finish, in blocks. Georgia had 4 blocks in the game. St. Louis had 6. There, other than Jeremiah Wilkinson, there was absolutely nothing positive to say about this game. It was the worst performance I have ever seen from a Georgia team of any sport, period. And the problem here is I appreciate what Mike White has done for the program. Last season, Georgia beat St. John's. Georgia beat the eventual national champion Florida Gators late in the season. This season, Georgia beat Kentucky, beat Texas, beat Arkansas, beat Alabama. Back-to-back seasons of going to the NCAA tournament, which has not happened in over 20 years. Georgia's only made 3 NCAA tournaments in the last 20 years before Mike White got there. So obviously, Mike White has taken the program to another level. But this is almost worse in a way because it's not losing. It's not losing in the NCAA tournament that Georgia fans have a problem with. The bar at Georgia is incredibly low. With the resources that the athletic program has, with the talent in the state of Georgia, what Georgia fans are asking of you is extremely low. All Georgia fans want is for you to win one NCAA tournament game. One. Other SEC programs have had in the past much more success than that. They're having much more success than that now. Tennessee, Florida, Alabama. These are teams who have taken their basketball programs far and beyond what Georgia fans ever even dream of taking their program. And there's no reason there should be that level of disparity between the programs. That is all Georgia is asking for, is to win one NCAA tournament game. And they haven't done it since beating Murray State over 20 years ago. That's not acceptable. And this was a situation where if Georgia had showed up in the SEC tournament and had even won one game instead of playing their other worst game of the season, they probably would have been a 7 seed. And so then they wouldn't have been matched up against Michigan in the second round. Georgia was never going to beat Michigan, okay? That wasn't going to happen. But at least maybe Georgia could have won one game. We saw, Michigan handled St. Louis. And your question with that was, okay, does that mean that Michigan would have easily handled Georgia, or does it mean that St. Louis really wasn't that good comparatively and there was no reason for St. Louis to have beaten Georgia by 102-77 score? It's a little bit of both. Michigan would have beat Georgia. It probably wouldn't have been that close. But I don't really think St. Louis on their best day is better than Georgia on their best day. I think that they're relatively close. I said that before. I think it was nearly a toss-up game. St. Louis is not 30, 40 points better than Georgia, period. But this is a pattern now in the Mike White program. We have the worst performances of the season in the tournaments. You had the NCAA tournament game last year. That was a unfortunate draw. You got matched up against Gonzaga, who should have been a much higher seed than what they were rated as at the time. So that's just a bad draw, but you didn't show up. It was 27-3. Gonzaga went on a 13-0 run to start the game. Ended up being 27-3, ended up being 30-5 before Georgia finally pulled their pants on and started playing basketball. So the Ole Miss game in the SEC tournament this year, first half, Georgia might as well be on the bus. Scored 20 points in the first half. The starters basically have to be pulled from the game and have the bench players come in and nearly lead them on a comeback. There is a culture problem at Georgia. I said earlier in the year, and I think I said it on this show, it looked like Georgia had quit on Mike White in the middle of the season. We're talking the Oklahoma game, that general area of the season. it looked like they didn't even want to be out there, that they weren't going to try to rebound and play defense. And that's what I saw from just about everybody but Jeremiah Wilkinson. You heard it from the players, Wilkinson and Smurf Millender in the press conference. You heard it from Mike White, blatantly, honestly saying they didn't want to be there. They weren't trying. They weren't hustling. I don't know how that's possible. I don't know how it is possible for someone who has put in that level of practice, should have been a dream of theirs, to not care, to not try, to not hustle. I understand being nervous. I understand missing shots. I understand why Cannon Catchings would have his worst shooting day. I don't fault him for that. Jeremiah Wilkinson said, there's going to be times when you're not shooting well. But there are ways to win the game when you're not shooting well. And I appreciated his honesty and him saying stuff like that. And he didn't have anything to apologize for. But Georgia didn't do those things that help you win when you're not shooting well. It doesn't, if you're nervous, you can still play defense. If you're nervous, you can still hustle for rebounds. You can still get back in transition. Georgia didn't want to do that. Georgia pouted when they weren't hitting their shots. Georgia panicked when they weren't hitting their shots. And whether that is a personnel thing, a coaching thing, a personal choice by the players, there's a lot of questions to be asked. This is a very different roster than what Georgia had in the Gonzaga game last year. Lots of turnover, transferred players in, freshmen coming in. So you can't say, oh, it's just the same crop of players. I like Mike White. I want him to succeed at Georgia. But this is a pattern now. And so I don't know what Georgia's going to do. They just gave Mike White a big extension very recently. He had earned that. He'd been Georgia's best coach for a very long time. However, this is kind of what our rivals to the South had warned about Mike White, that Mike White wouldn't get it done in the tournament. Well, that's starting to look like it's the case. Georgia plays their absolute worst basketball when it matters the most. So, I don't know what to say. I really don't know what to say about it. It makes you not even want to watch the team. It makes you not even want to support the program anymore. It's one thing to lose. It's one thing to be outclassed in talent. It's another thing to be outclassed in effort. And there was no sense in playing like that. The game was over within the first few minutes of the game. All the hype, all the excitement out the window, just like last season. It kind of ruined a lot of the tournament for me. There were a lot of games that I would have watched that then I didn't even bother to watch because I didn't feel like watching any more basketball because my team kind of ruined it for me. So I'm really ripping into the guys here, and nobody's probably ever going to hear it that's affiliated with the program, but it's hard to want to pour the time and effort, and a lot of people pouring the money into this program, now paying players to have a performance like that. I wouldn't have faulted the guys whatsoever if they had lost the game. I do fault guys for not trying, and they weren't trying, and that was obvious, and we all saw it. So, what Georgia's next step is, there's a lot of things you could say. I mean, I don't know. Is it you clean house? Is it you change strategy in the off season? I know one thing, my roster construction would be focused on trying to keep Jeremiah Wilkinson, and that would be the primary retention that I would be focused on, would be Jeremiah Wilkinson. And if the rest of the guys don't want to be there, then I don't want them there anyway. So maybe you find some guys who really do want to be there and maybe aren't quite as talented, aren't as athletic, who will actually play hard. I saw this. If you watch the Nebraska Vanderbilt game, so now I'm kind of getting into some other games in the tournament to talk about. I thought Vanderbilt was playing harder than Nebraska, who was also playing hard. Don't get me wrong. There was a very high effort level in that game. But I thought Vanderbilt was diving for balls, fighting for rebounds, getting on the floor. They were trying really hard. But on Nebraska, Hoiberg, okay, that dude was taking it to another level. It was like Vanderbilt's effort here, Hoiberg's level here, everybody else on Nebraska may be here. Not that they weren't trying, but we're talking Herculean efforts. And you saw that. They ended up winning the game. A very exciting last second game. Georgia needs some dudes like that. Georgia needs some dudes that were on Vanderbilt. Georgia needs some guys who are on Nebraska. Georgia needs guys that Hoiberg, he was a lot smaller. Didn't matter. He was going to mix it up every time there was a loose ball. He was going to go for every rebound. He was going to hustle. There's guys like that out there, and I don't see a lot of that from a lot of the Georgia players. So I'd like to see some more hustle. So that is my Georgia rant. If you're a Georgia fan, commiserate with me, criticize me, whatever. I've seen a lot of similar takes on social media. Everyone is very dejected, put out with the program. I mean, I don't really even know what to compare it to, because it wasn't that you lost. It wasn't that you didn't have the talent. It's that you didn't even try. So I think a lot of the guys had some nerves or had some anxiety. That's okay. I don't fault you for not shooting well. I don't fault you for being nervous. I do fault you for not getting back on defense and not rebounding. So moving on from the Georgia rant. If you are a non-Georgia fan, maybe you're skipping forward to this part. So I want to talk about first my brackets. If you watched any of the previous episodes or any of my talk about the NCAA tournament, I want to give a little insight into my brackets, how they are doing. And so the first thing I want to do is we did a mascot challenge. Who would win the NCAA tournament if it was a cage match between the mascots? We ended up saying the Clemson Tigers would win because we did not believe a hurricane or a cyclone, Miami and Iowa State, could go throughout the entire tournament. So, as you can see, this one is not doing well, and it should be doing even worse because I picked the game between NC State and Texas before the game had been played. So we were operating under the standpoint of this was the Wolfpack, not the Longhorns. But the bracket challenge is acting as though we picked Texas. So even with that in mind, out of about 26 to 27 million brackets on ESPN's tournament challenge, this bracket is ranked 25,440,913. That is in the 7.7 percentile. Has very little point potential. We got a few of them right. We got TCU. We got St. John's over northern Iowa. We got several right on the right side of the bracket. Hey, we got the High Point upset over Wisconsin correct. I didn't get that in my normal bracket. I wasn't picking that. We got the Texas over Gonzaga one right because we were picking NC State. I didn't pick that in my normal bracket. So there's some good. There's a lot of bad in our Final Four. Clemson is out. North Dakota State is out. NC State is out, but we're getting Texas. And Alabama is still in. So not faring well at all in the Mascot Challenge bracket. So anyway, let's check my primary bracket, which we did a bracket show on here breaking down the picks. Not going fantastic. It's going okay. We are in the 83.5 percentile. Our champion pick is still in. Where I kind of ran into some trouble here, I had Wisconsin winning one game, so I didn't get that right. But the Gonzaga one really got me. I had Gonzaga winning 3 games, and they only won 1 game. And so that one got me for sure. And I want to talk about that. So Texas, I think Texas did this last year as well. I didn't pick Texas because they had ended the season terribly. I believe they had lost 5 out of 6 games. They just really were not playing their best basketball. So I did not expect Texas to come in and win the play-in game, beat BYU, and then beat Gonzaga. Well, they decided to bring their A game in the tournament, and so I definitely got that wrong. The Florida pick is really hurting this bracket. I had Florida beating Iowa. Where I thought Florida might run into some trouble was possibly Vanderbilt, and going forward in that, I did not foresee them having trouble with Iowa. So that one got me for sure. I obviously had Vanderbilt over Nebraska, so that one got me a little bit. Virginia. So I thought Virginia-Tennessee was going to be pretty much a toss-up game, but I had Virginia winning 3 games in this bracket. I picked Iowa State in a lot of the brackets over Virginia or over Tennessee, but in my primary bracket, I had Virginia going all the way to meet Michigan in the Elite Eight. So that one really hurt me. I've got Florida in the Elite Eight, I got Florida in the Final Four in this bracket. So those are some spots where I did not do well. Our Final Four, we have 3 out of 4 still in it. We're not going to have an all 1 seed this year. As far as just some games that surprised me or something that I thought was a really good game, there weren't a ton of surprises. Even the High Point game, I did not pick that as an upset, but that was on the radar. I thought Wisconsin was playing well enough late in the year that they would win that game. So not a huge surprise, but I was a little bit surprised. I thought South Florida would beat Louisville, but Louisville only got through 1 game. I thought Missouri had a pretty good chance of beating Miami. That didn't happen. What were some other surprises? Obviously, St. Louis blowing the doors off of Georgia was a surprise to me. I did not expect Texas A&M. So I actually picked St. Mary's in most of my brackets, but I picked Texas A&M in some of them, and I forgot to mention that as one of the top 5 most likely upsets. So if you're relying on me for your upsets, I apologize that I didn't say that in my top 5 most likely upsets. But I definitely didn't see Texas A&M losing by 31 to Houston in the second round. I picked Houston in the second round, or would have picked them over either one of those 2 teams. Didn't see them winning by 31. So those were really the biggest surprises to me. Obviously, Florida. There's been some really good games. TCU Ohio State was a really good game. Wisconsin High Point, Florida and Iowa was a great game. Kentucky Santa Clara. Santa Clara was one that I said was a likely upset. They let one get away from them there, lost in overtime. So that was a really good game. So those were some of your better games. North Carolina VCU was a good game. So going forward, and if you want, you can make a second chance bracket for the Sweet 16. I don't know if I'll do that or not, but I expected Duke to beat St. John's going into the tournament. I still expect that. Same with Arizona over Arkansas. I thought Arkansas almost got tripped up there with High Point, so that's something for them to watch out for. In this bracket, I picked UConn over Michigan State. I still feel pretty good about that pick. I think that game's kind of a toss-up. Hey, I had Gonzaga over Purdue, so I don't know what to make of the Purdue-Texas game. If Purdue plays like they're capable, I'm picking Purdue. Iowa, Nebraska, no clue, guys. No clue. I would say Nebraska. They were playing really well against Vanderbilt. Alabama, Michigan game, I think Michigan's going to win that. I think Michigan's playing really well and proving that they are A-okay despite some injury concerns. The Tennessee-Iowa State game, I think that's going to be really good, but I think Iowa State's going to win that. Houston, Illinois should be really good. I would probably say I think Houston's going to win that, even though Illinois is playing really well. So anyway, let's just talk about the bracket in general, upsets, things like that. So going forward, I still feel really good about my pick of Arizona winning the national championship. I've got Duke in several brackets. I've got Michigan State in a bracket. I believe I've got Iowa State in a bracket, Houston. So I made 16 brackets. I did not make the maximum 25 on ESPN this year. But as you can see, my top two brackets right now, I've got Arizona and UConn. My Duke Houston brackets, some more Arizona brackets. Michigan State bracket actually has the potential for the most max points. And my worst brackets here, a Gonzaga bracket, Arizona, Purdue. Unfortunately, the Michigan bracket here is way, way down here, and got a Florida, Virginia, and Clemson bracket down at the bottom. So if you look at some of these celebrity brackets, I typically, the last couple of years, have really liked some of the Jay Billis's picks. I thought my bracket was probably a little bit closer to his than when I was making it than what it turned out to be. He's 99.5 percentile. So no perfect brackets left, unfortunately. We'll probably never have a perfect bracket. It's nearly statistically impossible. But anyway, so I want to move on to a little bit of college baseball. I want to talk about some things going on with Georgia before we close out this show. So Georgia baseball had a really good week. Georgia has had a good year, but this past week, so following the taking 2 out of 3 from Tennessee the previous weekend, including the very exciting last second win that we talked about, Georgia had the Citadel on Tuesday. So these midweek games, and I'll talk about this in just a second, have been a real hiccup for Georgia. They were down big. I believe it was 5-1 in the 6th inning against the Citadel on Tuesday, March 17th. Well, late in the game, Georgia did what they've been doing and came back, had a walk-off, won the game 8-5. So snuck out with a win over Citadel at home on Tuesday, then had Texas A&M, who's a ranked team, at home 9-4 on Friday night, 8-2 on Saturday. Two really good wins, and went ahead and took the series. Then on Sunday, Georgia had another head scratcher. So Georgia was down 15-1 at one point in this game, and I decided I didn't want to watch that. But they did make it a little more respectable, lost 18-5, so still a major blowout. But so this is kind of, it's not just Georgia. You're seeing a lot of college baseball teams, particularly SEC teams, losing to some teams you would not think they would lose to, having some blowouts. So Georgia, overall, I would call that a really good week. You take the 2 out of 3 from Tennessee. You beat the Citadel in a comeback win. You take 2 out of 3 from Texas A&M. And in baseball, that's what you're trying to do. You're not going to sweep every series. That's not going to happen. The Bobby Cox method of try to win every series, try to take 2 out of 3 in every series. And that's really the goal for Georgia, is to win 2 out of 3. So far, so good. But I want to talk about something that's looking like it is going to be a ongoing problem for Georgia, and they may have got it fixed on Tuesday. They're going to play Kennesaw State this Tuesday. Going through the schedule, so Georgia has an overall record on the season of 20-5. Have had some slip-ups with some smaller teams. So here's where this pattern really picks up. So on February 25th, that was a Wednesday, Georgia lost in 12 innings to Troy, 5-6. So, and we mentioned this before, that's a extra innings, 1-run game. Not a huge deal. Another midweek game, March 4th, Wednesday, you lose 9-10 to Western Carolina. Okay, well, then last Tuesday, you're down 5-1 or whatever it was at the time to the Citadel. So this is now kind of becoming a pattern. Smaller teams, midweek games. Georgia doesn't seem to have its best stuff. Is that a scheduling thing? Is that a routine issue? Is it just not really being up for a midweek game against a smaller school, which is a single game instead of series? What's the problem? But you're going to have midweek games all season. So Georgia really has to get that figured out. I wouldn't call it a huge problem. They have won some midweek games. The games that they've lost have been close. So it's not a huge problem, but that's something they need to get figured out. This week, Georgia, after the Kennesaw State game, has got a series at home against South Carolina. That will be Friday through Sunday. So that should be a pretty good one. And then the next week will be Georgia State and Mississippi State, who is elite in college baseball. So that will be really tough. That'll be in Starkville. So that's kind of all we're going to say for this show. I'll give you a little bit of a preview of what's coming down the rest of this week and into next week. This is opening week for MLB. We are going to have a show this week where I talk a little bit about opening baseball, some of the expectations I have, what's going on with the Braves. I'll probably talk a little bit about fantasy baseball, maybe show you how my drafts went. I had my drafts for 2 leagues this weekend. So we'll talk about that as well and kind of get into things there. And then, so next week, I've brought this up before. I did an interview with my friend Michael Schifferl, who he is a licensed marriage and family therapist. We talked about what is sports anxiety, what can be done to help with sports anxiety. We talked about how parents and coaches can identify it in their athletes and their children. What are some signs that there's something more going on than just your kid or your athlete or yourself are nervous? It's going beyond average game day hype to being a problem. And so we talked about that and what are some things you can do about it. And so I really felt like it was a good interview. We're going to have that episode out right now. The plan is for it to be going out in the audio format on Wednesday, April 1st, and the video version on YouTube will be going out Thursday, April 2nd. And you'll see some reels, some shorts, some smaller videos. We'll have that out next week. I'm really excited about it. I hope you'll tune in to that. And so that'll be a lot of what's going forward will be baseball, primarily the Braves, Major League Baseball, some college baseball. We'll talk a little bit more about the tournament. We'll probably have a little bit of spring football talk in here. But primarily it's going to be baseball, and we'll see if we can have some more interviews and some more guests on the show, stuff like that, because I think that's a lot more fun, a lot more engaging than just you guys sitting here listening to me rant about sports all alone in a box. So anyway, if you stayed this long through the rant, I appreciate it. So thanks for listening and have a good week.